Vivian didn't answer. She stared up at the ceiling, as if it might give her back the life she had before the crash, or at least a version of it that made sense. But the sterile lights offered nothing. Liam didn't push. He simply nodded once, then walked out of the room, his steps soft, unrushed. For a long while after he left, she stayed still, not asleep, not awake, just hovering in the space between what had been and what now was. It wasn't the pain in her ribs or the weight of the cast on her leg that made it hard to breathe. It was the quiet. The silence after decades of running everything, answering to no one, and always being the one needed, never the one needing. That night, Vivian didn't sleep. Not really. She lay there listening to the machine track her heartbeat, to the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway, to the rain tapping the window, as if the storm from New Year's Eve had followed her here and refused to leave. At 6:03 a.m., Liam returned with a breakfast tray and a folded schedule for the week. "Day 1, he said with a small smile, placing the tray down. "Porridge, protein shake, and something you won't enjoy. A visit from our physical therapist." Vivian didn't look at him. She stared at the wall and muttered, "I'll eat later." "You'll need your strength," he replied gently. "I said later." There was no sharpness in her voice, just exhaustion. Liam nodded, but didn't leave. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, not to challenge her, but simply to stay. Minutes passed. Then finally she asked, almost reluctantly, "Why are you still here?" Liam leaned back in the chair, arms folded loosely. Because most people break a little when they find themselves alone in a hospital bed. Even the strongest ones. Vivian turned her head slowly to face him. "I'm not broken." He didn't flinch. "Then you're ahead of the curve." She stared at him for a long moment. For the first time, someone hadn't tried to fix her or flatter her. He wasn't impressed. And oddly, that made her feel seen, in a way the boardroom never did. Something shifted then. Not big. Not dramatic. Just the kind of shift you don't notice until weeks later, when you look back and realize that's where the healing started. Vivian closed her eyes. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no. And just like that, for the first time since she built her empire, Vivian Carter was forced to stop. Not because she wanted to, but because there was no other choice. What she didn't know yet was that the man with the quiet eyes would be the first to see her, not as the invincible CEO, but as a human being, someone who needed healing. From that morning on, her schedule was laid out with the clarity of a business plan, except this time, she wasn't the one making it, and she had no power to override it. 7:00 a.m. Vitals check 8:00 a.m. Breakfast and bandage change 9:00 a.m. Physical therapy. Liam was always on time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. A level of professionalism that was almost irritating. But Vivian couldn't deny. His steady presence made the room feel less suffocating. Still, every therapy session felt like a battle. "I don't need this stupid exercise," she snapped when Liam handed her a simple arm bar. "It's to keep your joints from stiffening," he replied calmly, unmoved by the sharp edge in her voice. "If you want to hold your phone again, you'll need to hold a spoon first. Don't lecture me," she muttered, throwing the bar onto the bed, breath heavy from both fatigue and frustration. Liam simply looked at her, not angry, not disappointed, just present. "All right," he said softly, so soft it almost embarrassed her. "We'll try again tomorrow." A few days later, the session began in silence. Liam entered with a small device and a bag of uncooked rice. He said nothing, just placed the bag on the table and motioned for her to pick up the grains, one by one, with her injured hand. Vivian looked at him like he'd lost his mind. But this time, she didn't argue. Maybe it was because, the night before, she had tried to hold a spoon and failed. Minutes passed. The rice sat untouched. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Vivian," Liam said quietly, eyes still on the monitor beside her. That sentence, short, light, landed like someone had pressed a finger to a fracture she'd hidden for years. Vivian let out a dry laugh, then looked straight at him. "Did you know I once closed a $60 million deal while on an IV for exhaustion?" "I believe it," Liam smiled, not surprised. "But today, your job is to pick up rice." For the first time, not out of pride, not out of defiance, Vivian nodded. That afternoon, Liam returned to her room with a small potted plant, lavender. She frowned. "This isn't a spa." "No," he said, placing it gently on the windowsill. "But this room needs something that's alive. Vivian said nothing. But that night, she asked the nurse to move her bed a little closer to the window, just so she could see the lavender under the moonlight. And somewhere, buried beneath all the damage, something inside her began to ache, quietly. On a quiet weekend morning, the rehab center felt unusually still. The sky was pale gray. Rain tapped softly against the window pane, like a soundtrack made of patience and loneliness. Vivian sat propped up in bed, holding a worn paperback Liam had left her the day before, The Art of Stillness. A pointed choice, she thought. When Liam entered, he carried no equipment, just a cup of hot coffee and a faint, knowing smile. "No exercises today?" Vivian asked, trying to keep her voice flat, as if she hadn't been hoping exactly for this. "Not all therapy is about muscle," Liam said, settling into the chair beside her. He placed the coffee on the table. "I thought today you might need something different." "Oh? Emotional therapy now?" She arched an eyebrow, dry as ever, but her hands, steady now, reached out for the cup. She held it with both hands. A small act, but one that, a week ago, she couldn't do without shaking. Liam just smiled, his eyes watching her quietly. After a long pause, Vivian spoke, her voice unexpectedly softer. "I haven't called anyone since the night of the accident." Liam said nothing. He didn't press, didn't pretend to be surprised. He simply waited. "Because I know," she continued, her voice catching slightly despite her effort to keep it neutral. "No one really cares. They only care about what I represent, the title, the assets, the ability to handle the situation." Liam gave a small nod. "Someone once told me, real strength is letting someone see you when you're weak." She turned toward him, her gaze meeting his. Those dark eyes, quiet as river stones, weren't cold. They were warm, steady. "Why are you so patient?" she asked, part sincere, part testing. "I once made a junior exec cry just for putting the wrong date on a contract." "I'm not your employee," Liam said simply, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm just someone who sees a woman who doesn't know she deserves to be cared for." That sentence didn't feel like comfort. It felt like truth. The kind of truth she had never let herself hear before. Vivian went silent. Inside her chest, hardened like a block of ice for years, a thin fracture finally appeared. That afternoon, when Liam returned, Vivian was already standing, slowly, unsteadily, with a walker. She didn't say anything. He didn't praise her. They just exchanged a look, quiet recognition. On the windowsill, the lavender plant had bloomed its very first purple flower. And inside room 307, between the scent of antiseptic and the faded winter light, it wasn't just a body beginning to heal. It was a soul, learning, for the first time, how to leave the door open. On New Year's morning, the sunlight filtered faintly through the blinds, washing the hospital room in a pale gold. Vivian sat quietly in a chair by the window. She wore a soft pink sweater, one the nurse had left for her the night before, not a color she'd ever have chosen. But today, for reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to know what it felt like not to be herself for a little while. Liam arrived earlier than usual. No knock, no announcement. He simply placed a small paper bag on the wooden side table, still warm, the scent of butter and cinnamon rising into the air like memory. "Happy New Year," he said, voice low and kind. Vivian turned. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything back, just gave him a small nod, but Liam knew. For her, that nod was everything. No therapy today, no tight schedule, just Liam, sitting across from her, unfolding a piece of paper and pulling out a pen. "Want to play a game?" he asked, his tone lightly teasing, almost childlike. "What kind of game?" she replied, eyebrow raised, trying to hide the flicker of curiosity. "It's called 3 Things No One Knows About Me. I write down mine, you write down yours. No explanations needed." Vivian blinked. She'd stared down billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, but this felt disarming. And then she realized that was the point. They sat in silence, each with a page, writing. When they finally slid their papers across the table to each other, the moment between felt longer than a season. On Liam's list, she read, 1. I once wanted to be a musician, but never had the courage. 2. I hate coffee, but I bring it to patients because it makes them feel normal. 3. I still keep my childhood dog's collar in my nightstand drawer. I still haven't forgiven myself for a patient I lost 3 years ago. Vivian didn't say anything. but her lips pressed into a tight line, and her hand gripped the armrest a little more firmly. On her own paper, Liam read, "I used to play piano very well, but I haven't touched the keys in 18 years. I'm afraid of night rain, because my mother died on a night just like that. I used to believe no one in the world could ever truly love me." Liam didn't offer comfort. He didn't fill the silence with hollow words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black hair clip, old-fashioned, simple. "Next time you're up walking, use this," he said. "It'll keep your hair out of your eyes. You'll look more like someone returning to herself." Vivian reached out for it. Her hand trembled, not from pain, but from something softening inside her, something she hadn't let move in years. And in that brief moment, between the quiet and the golden light of the New Year's morning, two people, both long closed off from the world, were opening a door. No key, no plan, just a little trust. One late afternoon, as golden light stretched across the rehab center hallway, the usual noise from the waiting room, TV faded into background hum. Vivian was standing, or rather, trying to stand, between the parallel bars in the therapy room, sweat beading on her brow, hands trembling as they gripped the rails. Liam stood a step behind her, not touching, not guiding, just there, like a steady anchor you didn't have to lean on, but always felt. "Don't say you got this." "I hate that phrase," Vivian muttered between breaths, jaw clenched. "I wasn't going to," Liam said calmly. "I'm just waiting for you to decide." Vivian wavered, but didn't fall. She let go of the bars, stood on her own feet, slowly, unsteadily, but on her own. And then, finally, she sat down on the bench at the far end of the hall, exhaling like she'd just come through a private storm. Liam handed her a bottle of water and a towel. No compliments, no advice, just quiet presence, patient and unspoken. After a while, when her breath had steadied, Vivian spoke, barely above a whisper. "Last night I dreamed of my father. He was standing in the doorway of his office, wearing a gray suit. He looked at me and said, 'Everything you have, so you're not allowed to be weak.'" She looked over at Liam. "He died 3 years ago, never once said anything kind to me." Liam said nothing at first. He simply sat beside her, letting the silence settle, the kind that gives a heart space to breathe after too many years held tight. "I was 12, she continued. "I failed a math test. He tore it up in front of me, said I wasn't worthy of being his daughter." The words hung there, like something just released after decades of being buried. And then Liam spoke, his voice soft as wind over water. "The worst thing a child can believe is that they have to be perfect to be loved." Vivian turned to look at him, her eyes no longer sharp with anger, but cracked, in the way of something finally softening. "I don't know who I am without success," she said. Liam didn't blink. "Then maybe now's the time to find out." They said nothing more. She reached up, removed the old hair tie, smoothed her hair back, and fastened it with the simple black clip he had given her, not for appearance, but for clarity. To move forward, somewhere down the hallway, a piano played faintly from another room, Claire de Lune, soft and aching. Vivian closed her eyes, and in that moment, she felt herself stepping back, then forward, not with her feet, but with a courage she had locked away long ago. She hadn't forgiven her father. She hadn't forgiven herself. But she had begun, and Liam was still there, like a melody that needed no words, only a heart willing to hear it. That afternoon, the sky dimmed, hinting at a late spring rain. The air in the rehab center felt cool and clean, touched by the scent of freshly watered leaves from the garden outside. Liam was at his desk, reviewing notes from the day, when a quiet knock broke the stillness. Vivian stepped in. In her hand was a sealed envelope. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him the white envelope, her hand trembling slightly. "A letter from my mother," she said, eyes fixed on some invisible point just behind Liam's shoulder. "We haven't spoken in 10 years. She sent it yesterday." Liam didn't open it. He simply placed it gently on the table. "Have you read it?" Vivian nodded, then shook her head. "I read half. I stopped at the line. 'I'm sorry I left you alone back then. I didn't know what to feel.'" Liam didn't answer right away. He waited, silent, as though letting something open naturally. No pressure, no pushing. Vivian gave a short, bitter laugh. "It's strange. I spent my whole life waiting for her to say just that. And now that it's there, in ink, I'm not sure I even want to hear it anymore." Sometimes, Liam said quietly, we spend our youth hoping for an apology. But by the time it comes, we're no longer the person who needed it. Vivian sat down, hands clasped tightly in her lap. As a kid, I thought if I was good enough, smart enough, obedient enough, successful enough, maybe then my mother would love me. Maybe my father would see me. But every win was met with a cold nod. And every failure, she paused, her voice catching, was another door slammed shut. When I got into Harvard on a scholarship, a part of me still waited for someone to clap, to say I deserved it. Liam's voice came soft as breath. And no one did? Vivian shook her head, not a single person. Liam stood, walked over, and placed a hand on her shoulder, not as someone fixing her, but as someone simply witnessing her. Maybe no one ever applauded you, but that doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes weren't shielded by intellect or armor. They were wet, not from weakness, but from the courage of letting herself feel. Liam, I don't know what to do with those memories. I can't erase them. I can't fix them. You don't have to, he said. You just have to let them be seen. Outside, the rain began to fall. Not loud, not violent, just falling, soft and slow, like something being quietly washed away. Do you want to finish reading the letter? Liam asked, for the first time using a tone that felt personal. Vivian looked at the envelope, then nodded. He didn't move away, just sat beside her, waiting. When she opened the letter, her hands still trembled. Liam said nothing. He didn't need to. And in that plain room, with the sound of rain tapping softly on the glass, Vivian began to read, not just a letter from her mother, but a piece of the life she had buried beneath titles, trophies, and all the doors that had once closed on her. For the first time, she wasn't reading with her mind. She was reading with her heart. 3 days after that rainy afternoon, the rehab center entered its short spring holiday. Staff were reassigned. Some patients were cleared to go home temporarily. The halls felt oddly hollow, like life had paused in mid-motion. That morning, when Vivian arrived at the therapy room as usual, she was surprised not to see Liam. Just a few minutes late, she thought. But when she asked the nurse on duty, the answer hit like a blow to the chest. Liam's been temporarily transferred to a medical center in the neighboring state. They needed an urgent support specialist. He left yesterday. Vivian stood frozen, as if someone had packed up and moved out of a home she didn't know she'd begun to call familiar. Did he leave a message? She asked, trying to keep her voice even. The nurse shook her head. He just said he'd reach out when he could. Vivian walked out into the hallway. The cool air hit like wind through an open window. She thought she'd grown used to people leaving. Her father, her mother, others who once promised they wouldn't go. But this time was different. Not because Liam was gone, but because, for once, she had believed someone would stay. Later that same afternoon, in her small apartment, Vivian sat by the window alone. The tea in her cup had gone cold, but she still held it like it was the only thing keeping her together. Outside, the city was beginning to prepare for New Year's Eve. Fireworks, string lights, laughter in the streets, strangers hugging and shouting blessings into the wind. She didn't want to hear any of it. Her phone buzzed. A message. I know I left without saying goodbye, and I know you hate that, but I can't promise I'll stay when I still don't know where I'm going. Liam, that was all. No excuses, no promises. But what startled her wasn't the anger. It was the fear that she might forgive him. That night, New Year's Eve, fireworks exploded over the city skyline. Vivian stood on the rooftop of an old building, the one she always escaped to when she didn't want to be found. She watched as bursts of light split the sky, then disappeared just as quickly, like every beautiful connection she'd ever had, ever hoped for, ever lost. The wind slid down the back of her coat. She shivered, pulling it tighter. In her hand, a New Year's card, hastily written by an elderly patient earlier that morning. The handwriting shaky, the words simple. Sometimes people leave not because they want to, but because they don't know how to stay. But don't lock your heart just because someone lost their way. Vivian laughed, bitter, soft. A laugh curled inside a sigh. She didn't know if Liam would come back, but she knew this. If he couldn't, she would still go on. Because life doesn't wait for the ones who stand too long in doorways, staring at what's already gone. 3 days after New Year's Eve, the city returned to its usual rhythm. Vivian resumed her work at the rehab center. Liam's absence had left a quiet gap. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. That afternoon, under a gray sky, After she'd finished a session with an elderly patient, Vivian returned to the staff room. On the break table sat a crumpled envelope. No sender. Just a few words scrawled across the front. For Vivian, private. She paused. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The paper was thin, the handwriting slanted and uneven, but unmistakably Liam's. She recognized it instantly. From the very first line, "Vivian, I don't know if you'll want to read this, but I hope you will, if only to understand that I didn't leave easily. I didn't plan for the sudden transfer, but I also didn't look for reasons to say no, because when I saw your eyes that afternoon, full of trust, I was afraid I'd break it. I've lived most of my life chasing titles, results, recognition. Then you came in, quiet, undemanding, just patient and present. You made me feel like I didn't have to be perfect to be allowed to stay, but you deserve someone who doesn't hesitate, who doesn't walk away when things become real. I was afraid I wouldn't be enough for you, Vivian, but I'm more afraid of losing you without saying anything. If someday you're ready to listen, I'll be here." To finish the conversation, Liam, Vivian read the letter twice, then a third time. By the third, her eyes were blurred with tears, not because she was angry, but because a part of her had waited exactly for these words. Not perfect, but honest. That afternoon, as the overcast sky gave way to a soft drizzle, Vivian stepped onto the staff lounge balcony, the letter still gripped in her hand. Her heart felt quiet, but full of things unnamed. Far in the distance, a traffic light flickered, like the city whispering to her, softly, steadily. A breeze swept by, making the letter flutter, but she held it tight. This time, she wasn't letting go of anything she still wanted to keep. She didn't know if Liam would come back, but in that moment, she understood something important. She still had the right to choose. And this time, she would choose hope. 3 weeks passed. Vivian still hadn't written back. No messages, no calls. She'd reread the letter so many times she knew it by heart. But every time she picked up a pen, uncertainty flooded her chest. Something felt incomplete, not yet whole. She wanted to be sure, if she stepped toward him again, it wouldn't be from loneliness or grief, but from something clear, real. But sometimes, what we're not ready for finds us anyway. On a bright Saturday morning, wind danced gently through the wind chimes outside the rehab center. The air seemed to hum with quiet premonition. Vivian was helping an elderly woman take slow steps along the hallway when a voice came from the front desk. "I'm looking for Vivian Tran." She turned, and everything inside her stilled. Liam. He stood there, no crisp blazer, no badge, no shield, just a rolled-up shirt, simple khakis, hair tousled by wind, and eyes that were slightly unsure, but quietly sincere. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "But I needed to. I waited for a letter, but I realized I couldn't wait without trying." Vivian stood still, one hand still gently holding the elderly woman's elbow. A rush of feelings rose inside her. Surprise, hesitation, a flicker of anger, and something close to relief. A small, involuntary smile tugged at her lips, despite the tears welling up. "I'm not sure I know what to say," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I know I don't want you to disappear again." Liam nodded, a simple, small nod, but enough to say he'd heard, and he wouldn't go. That afternoon, they sat together in a small cafe on the corner, the one Vivian often went to after hard days. No flowery apologies, no promises, just two people, both once broken, learning how to believe in something honest again. "Why did you come back?" Vivian asked, staring into her warm cup of cocoa. "Because of you," Liam said, without hesitation. "But not because I need you to fix me. I'm here because I want to walk beside you. No roles, no walls, no running." Vivian looked at him for a long time. And then, she nodded. That night, fireworks exploded above the stadium, a makeup show for the rained-out New Year's Eve. They stood together in a quiet park nearby. No music, no crowd. Just the two of them, a woman who once didn't believe in emotion, and a man who never dared to accept love, now under the same sky, in the quietest peace they'd ever known. This time, neither of them turned away. Weeks after Liam's return, life didn't turn into a fairy tale. They didn't embrace every morning in golden sunlight. They didn't laugh through every dinner like the past was erased. They still kept space, close enough to not feel alone, distant enough to not wound each other again. They were starting from the beginning, as strangers who knew each other too well, One early March morning, as cherry blossoms just began to bloom in the park, Liam said, "Would you like to meet my family?" Vivian paused, looking up from her tea. Not because she didn't want to, but because of all the things he had never shared. "I thought you didn't talk to them?" she asked gently. Liam exhaled, eyes turning distant. "When I had my accident, they didn't come. Just called my assistant and wired money." After that, silence. "But last week, my mother called. She heard about you. She wants to meet." Vivian was quiet. Her hands folded tighter, not from fear, but because a new feeling stirred inside her, concern. For someone she once thought was too strong to need anyone. "I'll go with you," she said. No hesitation. That weekend, they drove to the Arlington Hill estate, the house where Liam grew up. It was large, but cold, not from the weather, but from the silent distance between blood. Liam's mother, Eleanor, was tall, sharp-featured, her eyes laced with judgment. When she saw Vivian, she gave a slight nod. Not approval, just civility. "You're the nurse who took care of my son?" Vivian met her gaze, steady. "I was. Now, I'm the one standing beside him." Liam's hand slipped beneath the table, gently finding hers. A small gesture, but enough. "What exactly do you plan to do with your life?" Eleanor asked her son, voice cool and measured. "To live," Liam replied. "Not for a legacy, not for appearances, but for myself." Silence followed. No one said more. No one needed to. When they left that house, there was no sense of relief. But they knew the hardest part hadn't been facing others. It was facing the parts of themselves they'd spent years avoiding. Later, as they pulled over beneath an old oak tree, Vivian said, "I used to think you didn't need anyone, but now I know. You just never had anyone you could trust." Liam didn't reply. He simply lowered his head and pressed a kiss to the back of her hand. No promises, no flourish, just a gesture, quiet and deep, from a man learning how to hold onto the one thing that finally mattered. Someone to walk beside. A few days after their visit to Arlington, Liam officially stepped down from his honorary board position at Bennett Group, a title he once fought for with cold precision and ambition. The news stunned the financial world. But to Liam, it all felt clear. That afternoon, in a small second-hand bookstore, tucked into a narrow street of the old town, Vivian was browsing a few medical books when he walked in. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, tracing a faint line across her nose as she smiled at the shopkeeper, a sweet Italian woman who called every customer my sugar cube. "Are you planning to go back?" Vivian asked after he told her everything. Not accusatory, just seeking truth. Liam leaned against a bookshelf, hands in his pockets. "No," he said, slowly. "I want to start over. From scratch. Start over. Where?" He paused, then looked directly at her. "Wherever you are. Anywhere we can live slow, live real, without having to wear a mask every morning." Vivian didn't answer right away. But as she stepped forward and gently adjusted the collar of his shirt, a simple, familiar gesture, Liam knew. She understood. Weeks later, they moved into a small home in the suburbs, close to a park, a bookstore, and just a few bus stops from the hospital where Vivian worked. No more back-to-back meetings. No contracts as thick as bricks. Instead, they had quiet mornings filled with coffee, the hum of a washing machine, and lavender bushes spilling over the balcony. Liam began teaching business skills to kids at a local community center. They called him Mr. Liam, strict but kind. And for the first time in years, he laughed without needing to restrain himself. One evening, while rearranging the bookshelf together, Liam asked, "Do you regret it? Choosing me, someone who once shut the world out?" Vivian placed a book down softly, then looked at him. "I didn't choose you because you were perfect," she said. "I chose you because you had the courage to change, to face what scared you most." Then, almost like a whisper to her own past, she added, "No one is born to be alone. Some of us just take longer to believe we're worthy of being loved." April came, spring in full bloom. They stood hand in hand in the park, watching children run through soft grass, while a street guitarist played a slow, tender tune in the background. No need for a dazzling skyline. No need for accolades or inherited wealth. Just these eyes, this hand, this sky. They had finally stepped out of the shadows of their past, not to forget, but to keep living, free, light, and full of hope. One early summer morning, sunlight gentle and birdsong still untouched by the roar of city traffic, Liam was watering the daisies on the porch when his phone rang. The caller ID, a landline from New York, he answered. A deep, clipped voice spoke on the other end. "Mr. Callahan, this is Patrick Reeves, legal counsel for the Bennett Group Board. We need to speak urgently." Liam tightened his grip on the garden hose. "I've stepped down. I no longer have any involvement with your company." "Actually, you do," Patrick said. "A major breach was uncovered from the previous executive cycle. If no one steps up to manage the fallout, the entire system could collapse. We need you back, temporarily, just to stabilize things." Liam didn't respond right away. In his mind, he saw Vivian in the kitchen, laughing with the neighborhood kids, flour on her shirt, batter in her hair, one hand stirring, one hand covering her mouth as she laughed too hard. That peace, the kind he never thought he'd find, now stood at a crossroads. That evening, under the soft glow of garden lights, Liam told Vivian. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, her voice calm but certain, her eyes on the tea in her hands, "I know you. You won't look away if there's a chance to protect those people, the workers, the families who depend on that company." Liam looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "But I don't want to leave this place. I don't want to leave you." Vivian looked up, the corners of her mouth curving gently, like she was wrapping sorrow in softness. "We've walked together through the deepest valleys of our lives. I can't be the one to hold you back, just because I'm afraid of losing you." She touched her hand lightly to his chest, the place where his heart had once hardened with pain, and whispered, "Go, but come back, when you're ready to live, not just survive." Liam left 2 days later. No flowers, no tears, just a promise, "I'll wait." The city welcomed him back with the sound of power, cold boardrooms, calculating stares, and the same people who once doubted him now looking to him for salvation. He threw himself into rebuilding the company, unraveling the knots of misconduct, making hard decisions, including firing people who had once been close allies. His conscience had to face the old ghosts he used to run from. 6 months later, on a winter afternoon, as snow began to fall on the glass roof of Manhattan's tallest office tower, Liam closed the final file. It was done. There was nothing left to tie him down. He submitted his resignation, this time, for good. Then he boarded the night train, bound for the place with the little house by the park. In his hands, a bundle of dried lavender, wrapped in old newspaper, the kind Vivian once grew. The train stopped. He stepped off, and she was there, as if she'd never left. No words, just an embrace, full and still, like the day he nearly lost everything. Life doesn't wait for us to be perfect before it offers us joy. It only asks that we're brave enough to return, to ourselves, and to the one who chose to stay. A few weeks after Liam's return, on a late winter morning when the sky was still drowsy under a veil of fog, he quietly stepped out onto the back porch. The wind was biting, but his heart felt warm. Ahead of him, Vivian was kneeling, tending to rows of lilac shoots just breaking through the soil. Every movement was gentle, not because she was fragile, but because she had learned to stop resisting life. He stepped behind her, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders. "Spring is almost here," she said without turning, her voice like a song he'd known forever. "I have nothing to bring back to you, except myself," Liam said, placing a hand softly on her shoulder. Vivian turned to face him. "I don't need anything else. I only need you, still willing to build something with me. Not as someone who had it all, but as two people starting again." A week later, they reopened Vivian's mother's old bakery, long abandoned at the corner of town. No flashy signs, no marketing gimmicks, just a tiny storefront with a hand-lettered window. Everyday bakery, simple bread for simple days. The first customer was an elderly man, asking for a cup of tea to warm his hands. The second, a schoolgirl who always forgot her wallet. Then slowly, day by day, people came, not just for pastries, but to feel a little less alone. Liam wasn't a CEO anymore. Vivian wasn't running from anything. They were bakers now, and two people learning to live slowly, honestly. One Sunday afternoon, sunlight pooled across the long wooden table. Liam gently wiped a smear of flour from Vivian's cheek. "Do you know why I love this kitchen?" he asked. "Because of the smell of bread?" she teased. "Because here, we don't have to pretend we're okay. Here, people eat pastries and talk about their sadness, without fear of being judged." Vivian didn't answer right away. Her eyes glistened. Then she whispered, "You know, the broken pieces in us once felt like a burden. But now, Pieced together, they're what make this feel like home. On New Year's Eve, the bakery closed early. They sat beside the wood stove, mugs of hot cocoa in hand. No countdown, no fireworks, just a quiet promise. For the new year, I don't need grand dreams. Just to wake up each day, knowing the other is still here, still loving, still patient, and still foolish enough to believe in love after everything. They clinked mugs, smiled. The night moved slowly, and love stayed. One morning, golden light streamed through the bakery's front window. Vivian stood behind the counter, hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa, but her eyes drifted far away. Liam noticed, from the way she mismeasured ingredients, the way she forgot to turn on the oven, things she never used to miss. He stepped beside her, placing a hand gently on her back. "Are you okay?" Vivian turned to him and smiled, but there was something uncertain in it. "I think I should get checked. Maybe I'm just tired, but maybe it's something else." 3 days later, they sat in the small clinic of Dr. Clark, their elderly neighbor, who once treated Vivian for a cold when she first moved to town. "Why don't you both take a seat?" he said with a grin behind thick glasses. "I'm no good with small talk, so I'll just say it. Congratulations. Vivian's pregnant. 6 weeks." The air stilled. Vivian's eyes widened. Liam froze, as if not quite grasping it yet. And then, in an instant, a flood of images swept through both their minds. Not grand ideas of schools or houses or careers, but small, tender things, a tiny hand gripping theirs. A midnight cry, wobbly first steps. Then she smiled, not radiant, but deep and full. "I think I'm ready to begin a new chapter. With you. With our child." In the days that followed, life moved on, as steady and warm as the turning of dough in an oven. Vivian still baked, though a little slower. Liam fussed over her more than necessary, adjusting her chair, switching to lighter flour, reaching for trays before she could. Vivian just shook her head and laughed. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." But deep down she knew he wasn't afraid of her being tired. He was afraid of losing something again. And when Liam had something worth holding on to, he would hold it with everything he had. One spring night, after the last customer had left the bakery, they sat together on the doorstep, hand in hand. Moonlight brushed across their faces, two people who had once lost so much, who had once doubted they'd ever start again. Liam turned slightly and rested his hand gently on her belly. "Who do you think they'll take after?" Vivian smiled softly. "I hope they have your heart." "Even if you once thought you didn't have one," he didn't answer. He just leaned down and kissed her stomach, the place where something miraculous was growing, not just a life, but proof that love could heal, could begin again, could take root, even in the deepest wounds. They didn't know what the future would look like. Would the bakery expand? Would parenting exhaust them in ways they couldn't yet imagine? But in that moment, they knew one thing. A new life was beginning. No longer alone, no longer running. Just two people and a tiny growing soul moving together toward the light. The following spring, when Oliver turned 1, their small town began buzzing with preparations for the annual spring festival. Their bakery, Everyday Bakery, was no exception. Vivian and Liam were busy with new batches of pastries, while Oliver took his first wobbly steps among the warm smells of flour and butter. One morning, as sunlight filtered softly through the bakery window, Oliver stood up from his playmat, braced himself on the edge of the table, and took his first steps toward his parents. Liam and Vivian looked at each other, their eyes glowing with pride and joy. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Their embrace, and the bright, overflowing smiles on their faces, said it all. Those tiny steps weren't just a milestone in Oliver's growth. They were a symbol of a family who had walked through darkness to find quiet, everyday joy. They had learned how to love, how to forgive, how to build something tender and strong from the ground up, with laughter and patience and deep, quiet care. On the day of the festival, Everyday Bakery became the town's favorite gathering spot. People came for the warm pastries, but stayed for the warmth of the place, the kindness, the comfort, the way everyone was known by name. And Oliver, with wide, curious eyes and an innocent smile, became the heart of it all, bringing joy just by being there. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky, Liam and Vivian stood together, hand in hand, looking upward. They knew the future would still hold uncertainty, but they had each other. They had Oliver. And they had a small, imperfect, beautiful family, built on everything they once thought they couldn't have. Life wouldn't always be easy, but with love and patience, they had found happiness in the simplest things. And they knew Oliver's little steps were just the beginning of a long, unfolding journey where every day was a gift.